Hey friends, Lucian here with the Bullish Bears team. Wanted to make this video on the bull pennant pattern. So again, I stressed in my bull flag and bear flag videos, don't get bogged down by pennants, flags, wedges. They tell a very similar story. So I'm going to read what a pennant is and then show you several different examples and then show you on charts like, hey, it might look like a flag or it might look like a pennant, but just show you how it's telling the same story, right? So a pennant is a continuation pattern in technical analysis formed when there was a large movement in a security known as the flagpole, followed by a consolidation period with converging trend lines. The pennant, followed by a breakout movement in the same direction as the initial large movement, which represents the second half of the flagpole. Pennants, which are similar to flags in structure, have converging trend lines during their consolidation period and last from 1 to 3 weeks. The volume at each period of the pennant is also important. The initial move must be met with large volume while the pennant should have weakening volume followed by a large increase in volume during the breakout. Now, that's in an ideal world. If you've been following along in our videos and our courses, everything isn't always ideal in the stock market. Sometimes it might last, the one week, with the consolidation, that makes sense, but it doesn't have to be up to 3 weeks. It doesn't always have large volumes. Sometimes the volume's smaller. Again, relative volume. Volume is relative. Sometimes you won't get huge volume on a breakout, and sometimes you will. So when I show you these patterns, again, it's very important to see the overall big picture. Obviously, volume, huge confirmation. That's awesome. It really helps to confirm something, with the continuation moving up or down, depending on whether it's a bull or a bear pennant. But sometimes you're not going to get that as well. Sometimes a pennant might look like a wedge, right? So that's okay. Just be aware of what's happening, like what's actually going on. And when I show you these, you'll see what I'm talking about, how it's, again, important to look at the big overall picture and not bog yourself down with exactly what it is 100%. So let's take a look at Goldman Sachs, GS, right? So you're going to see now, again, flagpole doesn't mean only one candlestick. Flagpoles could mean several candlesticks put together. So sometimes you'll see one big candlestick, or sometimes you'll see several candlesticks and you just put them together, which make, the flagpole, right? So you can see right here, some big green volume coming in here, bullish volume, creating the flagpole. And then you can see higher lows being created. You can see lower highs being created in the consolidation right at this apex point here, right near the 9 EMA. And then as you can see here, right here, some bigger volume coming in to confirm it. Now that's a perfect looking pennant, right? So that's ideal. Big volume coming in, creates the flagpole, gets the decreasing volume right here, creating that consolidation or a pennant, followed by a breakout, right? Very perfect looking pennant. Now I'm going to show you something here that could really throw you off, and I'm going to do it on purpose because this is where something could look like a pennant, and then if you draw your trend line differently, it could look like something different, right? So watch this. I'm going to remove this, and then I'm just going to do this. I'm going to draw a line across instead, right? Now you have almost like an ascending triangle, kind of a flat top breakout. So you could do it across like this. It's kind of a flat top. It's not necessarily a pennant. Now you have like an ascending wedge, right? So kind of like an ascending wedge area, but it still broke out. So my point being, it broke out before and it broke out here. Now let me just do another thing. I wouldn't necessarily do it this way, but just to give you an example, right? To show you how different things could look. Let's just say you said, okay, well, this stock was forming a base right here, right? It formed like a peak it couldn't get over, but there's also this consolidation here. Well, look at this. Now it's kind of just like a flag. So you notice that I just made it a pennant to a ascending triangle, flat top breakout, also to a flag. So my point being in all this is a lot of this area right here, depending on what pattern you're looking at, this area might not be as important, but you can see kind of a clearly kind of this top area that's very, very important. So if I remove this drawing here, let's see here, and I look at this area, you can kind of see a clearly defined kind of top. But if I also wanted to remove the drawing here, and then I can see it is kind of sloping right here. You can kind of see it sloping a little bit. So you can kind of see a slope right over here. So you can kind of see it coming down right there, and I can kind of just move this area down here a little bit. So again, this could be several of things. It could be a flat top. It could be a pennant. But see, that's the point. That's the point I really want to show you guys. That's why I don't want to show just perfect examples all the time, because it could be several different things. So I just showed you several different things that this could be, like an ascending wedge, a pennant, a flag. But guess what? It doesn't matter. It's got a flagpole and it's consolidating back. It's very important to try to get these lines. Sometimes it's not going to always be perfect. Sometimes you'll miss a breakout. But you know, just you kind of just gauge and bring these things together, and you can see, all right, okay, you have an apex point, stock's looking to potentially break out, and there it is. So this is what I wanted to really share with you guys. I'm going to show you several other examples, but I wanted to show you it this way with what something looks like in different ways, and how you can how it can be kind of trick you and just be, but it's still telling the same story, right? Let's take a look at Jpmorgan. This one might look a little bit better as a pennant. So this one right here, as you can see, kind of flagpole moving up, kind of the lower highs, the higher lows. This looks a lot better as more of a pennant, right? I probably wouldn't just draw the line across here, right? So the other one I kind of tricked you a little bit with. This one shows a little bit more like really good. I can't really mess this up too much. It's got a really good looking pennant. But if you look on the breakout area, it did have some decent volume. But my point being in all this is that it's not as much as the original volume. So that's why, like, sometimes you'll get, you know, more volume. It might be higher than the relative volume that you can see in these smaller candlesticks here, but it might not be as big as the bigger candlesticks moving up. But as you can see, candlesticks moved up, kind of formed this triangle. Now, a lot of people will be like, oh, that's a symmetrical triangle. Again, we're going to get into our courses, triangles and symmetrical triangles. But yeah, this is also a symmetrical triangle, but a symmetrical triangle doesn't have the flagpole. So you can say, well, this is where, again, don't bog yourself down. Well, if you see the pennant and you see a symmetrical triangle, if you start thinking, well, is that a symmetrical triangle? Is it a pennant? What should I do? At the end of the day, doesn't matter. You know, again, this has a flagpole. If you want to call it a symmetrical triangle, that's fine. It's still telling the same story. Price is looking to jump out of that, or potentially looking to jump out. Obviously, it did here from this apex point on the triangle. So that's where, you know, flags, wedges, pennants look very similar. A bull pennant looks very similar to a symmetrical triangle. It just doesn't have, or it has a flagpole, whereas the symmetrical triangle doesn't. But again, don't bog yourself down. Look at what it's trying to do. It's looking to continue up further. Moves up, consolidates to break out and move up further. That's the story it's trying to tell. But obviously, many times they break down as well. They don't always just go up. Let's take a look at Twitter. Twitter, if I move back over here. So this one right here, a little bit messier of a chart pattern, right? So this is moving up. You can see it's got some decent volume here. It consolidates, getting a little bit messy, a little bit choppy right here. And you can see kind of a false breakout here. Didn't break out. And then it broke out right here. So if you look at that big green candlestick right here, it's, you know, not that huge a volume, right? So it kind of broke out. Then you got this kind of hanging high wave candlestick, and then it came down. So sometimes it'll pop and drop. Sometimes it'll just drop and do nothing. But you can see here, this one had a fake out candle, didn't break out. Next one broke out, and then huge warning sign right there. Watch our video on high wave candles. That's a very, very huge warning sign. Let's look at IMMR. All right, perfect example, right? So this is a different one. So now this you can say, huh, is that a symmetrical triangle or is that a pennant? Because that looks awfully like a symmetrical triangle. Well, it is. But also here, this gap up is an invisible flagpole. So this is also a big pennant, but it's still telling the same story as that symmetrical triangle. It's showing you here again a flagpole. So this is a big bull pennant, but again, if you saw this pattern, it's still a symmetrical triangle. It's still kind of consolidating in this triangle and it's wanting to break out. Obviously, it didn't get this far down to break out. Sometimes it'll go right to the apex point and break out. Sometimes it'll break out sooner. Sometimes it'll fail, right? It's no guarantee it's going to break out. But this is one of an invisible flagpole consolidating to a triangle to break out, or a pennant. That's the other thing. Very simple. Do you want to call it a pennant or a triangle? Right? So this is where you don't want to bog yourself down. I like to call it like a triangle. I naturally say, oh, look at that triangle. Look at that symmetrical triangle. I would probably just look at this and I would just call it a triangle because that's what I'm used to saying, because my brain just naturally, it's easier to say triangle. It's not easy to say, bull pennant, right? It's just easier to say triangle. So that's, again, that's why with saying with flags, sometimes it's just easier to say flags than wedges. It's just kind of like the jargon, but it's still just look at the story it's trying to tell. Stock gaps up, consolidates back to the moving average lines to either break out or break down. This obviously broke out. Now you can look in here at the breakout point. You could actually see there was a red candle, so it actually broke out and then closed lower on the day. Still broke out, but it's not a confirmation of, it's got a lot of volume, but ended up red on the day. And then it's still not that much volume, but relative volume, right? You can see not much candlesticks going on over here. So that's kind of relatively higher, right, than what it normally trades at. Let's take a look at a few more examples. I'm all about repetition. Repetition is the key. You can never look at too many patterns because it takes looking at thousands of charts to have this stuff really make sense. You're going to see lots of lines on this chart. So here's another perfect example of something that'll trick you up and kind of mess it up a little bit on you. So flagpole up, right? You can see there's decent volume. Not really. I mean, relative, right? Volume's relatives. It's kind of low down here, and you can see right there, it actually didn't get the volume really. But it actually did. It kind of gained up a little bit on the flagpole, and then you can see it kind of drew these trend lines, formed like kind of a pennant look there, right? Again, they're not always going to be perfect. You can see there was a breakout area right over here. You don't see much volume. It broke out and then kind of went up a little bit and traded sideways. Some pennants are going to break out great. Some will break down. Some will kind of do, trade sideways. So let's change things up here a little bit. This looks like a pennant, right? Let's do this. Let's remove this drawing and just do one across, right? You can see stock went up once, twice, almost 3 times, kind of failed there, kind of went up over here. Now you could say, oh, that's an ascending triangle or an ascending wedge kind of, right? So you can say ascending triangle, ascending wedge, flat top breakout, right? So that there's several different things that could be. You can see that this line is still over here. It's still kind of, this is where, again, you want to be able to draw because it is very important, because you could, well, this one did, you could catch it more down over here if you're drawing your trend lines properly, because it's important to try and get these triangles so you can find more of an apex point, so you can have a horizontal resistance as well as this angular to kind of catch this like apex point, because you may have caught it a little bit, maybe potentially more right around here than if you were looking up at here, but it's still showing the resistance. So you see how something can be like a pennant, but then also like a flat top. It's just connecting these trend lines. You're going to have trend lines and stuff all over your charts. The more you get better with things. But a lot of the bigger stocks, you can kind of gauge these patterns like this. And if you time it right, for a nice breakout, this can break out and have some decent gains, right? Very important to pay attention to these patterns. Super important. But as you can see, you can change something from a pennant to an ascending wedge or ascending triangle or even into a flag, right? Happens all the time. Let's look at a couple more here. PBI. All right, perfect example of this one. So here's one where, remember the original example, it said from 1 to 3 weeks? Well, if I draw those lines here, from kind of like right here to kind of right here, look at this. Perfect example. So, had some breakout volume here, this big flat flagpole, some consolidation. This candle broke out, not much volume. This is only 1, 2, 3, 4 kind of days total. That's a pennant. That's a triangle. Now, is that a symmetrical triangle or a pennant? Well, it's a pennant because it's attached to a flagpole, but if you want to call it a triangle too, it is still a triangle. What is it still trying to tell you? It's in an uptrend. It's breaking out. It wants to continue upwards. As you can see, price broke out of the triangle, right? Or the pennant. So that is a pennant, and that didn't take up to a week to form. Doesn't mean that it's not a pennant, but it also, whatever you want to call it, triangle, pennant, don't bog yourself down. It's still telling the same story. Very important. It stocks moving, breaking out, wants to consolidate back before it moves up. Now, watch this. Let me throw you off a little bit. Let's do this. Let's just say kind of like this. You can kind of do it like this if you want a little bit. It's not perfect, but you can kind of just, you can draw it like this and be like, oh, that's a flag, right? So the way I kind of change my trend lines here, I can make it look like a flag, or I can make it look like a triangle, or I can make it look like a pennant or a wedge. You see how it's kind of telling a different story the way I change my trend lines? Now it's a flagpole moving up, pulling backwards before it pulled out, or went before it broke out. So again, whether it's a flag or whether it's a wedge, still telling that same story. Again, if you get your trend lines right, you might catch the breakout a little bit better. I just like seeing this one right here as more of a triangle to catch more of an apex point. See how that works? Takes a long time to get to know how to do this stuff, but that's where we're trying to simplify this in our course by showing people just very simple, starting off with just basic candlesticks all the way up to the patterns. So we're going to kind of progress and naturally show you all these different patterns one by one, show you the bigger picture so that hopefully it shortens your learning curve with really learning these patterns, because it does take looking at thousands of charts and patterns to really get comfortable